Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking some truly mind-bending research on human behavior and memory. Most of us just naturally assume that making someone obsess over you or, just making yourself totally unforgettable means you've got to be constantly present. We think we need to be right there in their face, blowing up their messages, just always available. But the source material we're diving into today, it argues that's completely backwards. The actual architecture of psychological obsession isn't about being ever present at all. It's actually about mastering this highly constructed, totally counterintuitive formula of selective absence. Seriously, you're not going to want to skip a single minute of this explainer because we're breaking down the exact psychological triggers that make the human brain prioritize one specific person over literally everyone else. Okay, let's dive into this cognitive roadmap. We've got 5 key principles to unpack today. First, the power of absence. Second, the Zeigarnik effect. Third, creating sensory anchors. Fourth, the investment strategy. And finally, the peak end rule. So starting right off with principle number 1, the power of absence and how we escape the dopamine trap. Constant texting might feel like you're building a deep connection, but according to the research, it actually turns you into what they call a solved puzzle. Think about it, there is absolutely nothing left for the other person's brain to figure out. But when you apply selective absence, something like a 24-hour rule, you actively force their brain to do some heavy lifting. Human brains absolutely hate empty spaces, so when you step back, their mind just scrambles to fill in those gaps. They start wondering, wait, what are they doing? Who are they hanging out with? Why aren't they texting me back? And that gap, that's exactly what breeds intense, undeniable curiosity. This whole idea is summed up perfectly in this quote from the source material. Attention is a currency. If you give it away for free, it loses its volume. Really think about that for a second. In economics, scarcity is what creates value, right? Well, the exact same principle applies to human attention and psychological focus. By actually giving less of your attention, you are practically guaranteed to get significantly more of theirs. Now, what's really interesting is principle number 2, the Zeigarnik effect, or the unfinished loop. So, the Zeigarnik effect. This is a very well-documented psychological fact, which states that the human brain remembers uncompleted tasks way, way better than completed ones. It's basically how our working memory operates. When a task is finished, your brain just clears it out. It checks the box, wipes the slate clean, and moves on to the next thing. But what happens when there's unfinished business? Your brain literally cannot let it go. It's like leaving a dozen tabs open on your web browser. It leaves a cognitive loop open, which practically forces the human mind to stay awake at night just completely fixated on that one unresolved thing. So, how do we actually apply this in real life? Well, the sources suggest imagining a simple 3-step cliffhanger method to create this massive cognitive gap that the other person will be absolutely desperate to close. Step 1. You're in a great conversation, things are flowing, and you reach this absolute high point. The energy is just buzzing. Now, most people would just let the conversation drag on until it inevitably gets a bit boring. But instead, you jump to step 2. You casually mention something super interesting that you want to tell them, but then you abruptly say, actually, I'll tell you later, I've got to run. And boom, step 3 happens all on its own. You've left that open loop totally unresolved. You just artificially manufactured a Zeigarnik effect right there in their brain. They literally will not be able to stop thinking about what you were going to say until the next time they see you. Moving right along to principle number 3, creating sensory anchors, which are basically subconscious triggers. The research points to this fascinating technique called the signature move, and it's all about sharing a highly unique sensory experience with someone. You see, human memory is deeply, deeply tied to our senses. Our olfactory bulb, the part of the brain that handles smell, connects straight into our memory centers. So if you wear a really consistent, specific scent every single time you're around them, or maybe you share a super unique song they've never ever heard before, you are planting a psychological seed. Because days later, when they're just wandering around living their life, and they catch a whiff of that exact scent in a crowded coffee shop, or they hear that specific melody playing in a movie, their brain automatically and totally involuntarily snaps right back to you. You are literally triggering memories of yourself out in the wild without even being in the room. To put a scientific label on this, what you're essentially building here is a classic Pavlovian response. You are literally coding your presence into their everyday physical environment. It's a real game changer because you become this subconscious trigger, hardwired right into their daily routine, which guarantees you're going to pop into their head even when you are miles away. Let's move to and see how this builds into principle number 4, the investment strategy, relying on behavioral justification. This brings us to something called the Ben Franklin effect. Now, this is a psychological phenomenon where we actually end up liking people more when we do favors for them. I know, it sounds like a complete paradox, right? Normally, we assume that if we want someone to like us, we need to do a bunch of nice things for them. But the research totally flips this assumption on its head. It turns out if you ask the other person for a small, non-intrusive favor, maybe asking for a quick book recommendation or just getting their advice on a tiny problem, you're actually prompting them to emotionally and practically invest in you. The subconscious logic behind this is just wild. Basically, once they invest their own time or effort into helping you out, their brain immediately has to rationalize why they just did that. It desperately wants to avoid cognitive dissonance, so it tells itself, well, gee, I must really like this person if I'm going out of my way to spend my time helping them. Their brain literally justifies the effort by artificially inflating how much affection they feel for you. It is such a brilliant, sneaky little mechanism. Which leads us perfectly into our final building block, principle number 5, the peak end rule, the actual science of memory. The source material makes a totally vital claim here. Human beings absolutely do not remember every single minute of an interaction. We just don't. Instead, our brains are ridiculously selective. Let's say you hang out with someone for exactly an hour. Your brain doesn't log all 60 minutes evenly. Nope. It basically just takes 2 snapshots. It takes a picture of the high peak, let's say around minute 45 when you both shared a really deep laugh or had a super profound realization, and then it takes a second snapshot of the exact note the interaction ended on at minute 60. That is it, the peak and the end. So the ultimate strategy here is to make sure your hangouts always have one intense, memorable high peak and that you consciously leave on a positive, high-energy note. Doing that guarantees the residual memory they have of you is just unbelievably powerful. But let's just hit the brakes for a second. We have gone through some seriously intense psychological strategies today. And the source material pauses right here to ask a really profound question, serving as a bit of a reality check. Does deploying all of these carefully calculated techniques actually create genuine love? Or are we really just manufacturing anxiety? The source wraps all this up with a massive final twist that we absolutely have to cover. Because, yeah, there is a dark side to these behavioral hacks. If you're out there using these tricks, dropping cliffhangers, faking selective absence, without any genuine good intent, you aren't actually building a real connection. You're literally just manufacturing anxiety in somebody else's nervous system. And that's not great. True magnetism, the real deal, isn't about perfectly executing some checklist of psychological parlor tricks. Real magnetism comes from being a person who is so intensely focused on your own personal growth, your own passions, and your own life that you just naturally have selective absence. You naturally have high energy interactions because you're genuinely excited about life. You become someone whose world is so inherently interesting that other people can't help but wonder how they can be a part of it. So the ultimate question to leave you with is this: are you just playing psychological games to capture someone's attention, or are you actually building a life that naturally commands it?